Ashton Lattimore. Ashton Lattimore is an award-winning author, journalist, and former lawyer. She writes historical fiction that puts powerful, complicated women at the center of their own stories and sheds light on overlooked communities. Her debut novel, All We Were Promised, was a book club of the month and selected as best book of the year by the Washington Post and NPR. And Runner is her second novel. I'm super excited to be here with you. I just want to say I'm like super honored to have this conversation, and I'm so grateful that you chose to write this book. I think that you have a gift for taking the corners of Black history that have been flattened and putting a light onto them. And thank you for spending time with us. And I'm just going to jump right on in with our question. First of all, Runner takes us somewhere I think a lot of readers have not been to before for a historical fiction book. We see the Black community in Martha's Vineyard in 1923. What was the moment this story first insisted on being written? Was it a character? Was it history you stumbled upon? Or was it an emotional question that you
It was a piece of history that I was visiting Martha's Vineyard, I guess 12 years ago, and I learned about a shipwreck that happened there during Prohibition, where it was very odd. The Coast Guard just came in the morning and found that this ship, which was supposed to be a fishing ship, had like broken apart, and there were these bottles of ale floating in Vineyard Sound, and there were 6 bodies just floating in the wreckage with their life vests on, so they wouldn't have drowned, and they all had all these injuries, and it was clear somebody had killed them, and the captains were missing, and the 2 lifeboats were missing. And this was like a big enough mystery that it made the New York Times, and they covered it for like several weeks at a time in 1923, and there was an exhibit about it at the Martha's Vineyard Museum. So I learned about that, and that's the moment that I kind of found out that Prohibition, during Prohibition, Martha's Vineyard was a big launch point for rum runners who would like basically go out under cover of darkness and bring liquor back from ships that were over the international waterline. And so I kind of found that out, and I already knew a bit about the long-standing Black history on the island. So once I learned that, I was like, I'm gonna put these 2 things together. And
And you knew that history because you're like from the area, right?
I'm from the Northeast, so I think maybe it's just like part of the, I don't know if it's part of like everyone's culture, but you kind of know about it. I had been to Vineyard once or twice before that trip, because actually a cousin of mine got married up there, and his wife lived from there, which is not something that I knew existed before I met her. I didn't know you could live from there. Live there year round. I thought it was just like a vacation destination. So I kind of have that background knowledge, and that's part of the reason why this story in particular is about someone who lives there year round and isn't a summer resident. There are summer people in the book. It's like 2 protagonists, and one is a summer person and one's a year round person. But I wanted to kind of show both halves of the Black community there.
Yeah, as someone from the Midwest, I didn't know that people also like live there. I didn't know we lived there.
Yeah.
I thought, you know what I mean? I thought that was kind of relatively new, not like, early 1900s. So that was really cool to see too. Kind of related question. I feel like both All We Were Promised and this book, Runner, kind of excavate Black history in a way that they live in gaps. What draws you again and again to the stories that get left out?
So a couple of things. I often just learn new facts, like in the course of just walking through the world. So I found out this about the shipwreck while I was in the Vineyard, and this is the information that inspired All We Were Promised, which is set in Philadelphia during the pre-Civil War era. I found that out while I was living there, and I was like walking through a museum. I go to museums a lot, and I kind of just want to drag everybody with me, and then the books have kind of become a way to do that, like on a really wide scale. Before I could just take my husband and my friends with me and be like, we're going to go to this exhibit. Now everybody has to come. Anybody who reads the book is going to come along on the journey. So it's just kind of fun, interesting facts that I find out that are just interesting to share. And the other thing is I'm fascinated by the Black North in particular. I think a lot of historical fiction, rightfully and understandably so, is set in the South, and is set largely in the South, and often during like the time of slavery or civil rights. And there are just so many other stories that are available to us. All of those stories are important. My first book dealt with slavery and abolition, so those, but there's just other stories available to be told, and I think the stories in the Black world especially are interesting because you just very seldom hear, especially about free Black communities in the time before slavery ended, or in the case of Martha's Vineyard, there were free Black people there. Whenever it was the captain of a whaling ship in 19th century, there are just these long-standing, pretty economically successful Black communities in many of these northern states and cities that you just would otherwise never know about. So it's always
as a museum goer and like avid art lover, like it just makes my heart sing that you actually like are pulling inspiration from both of those. I think that's such a nice overlap that we don't talk about enough, like the literary world, the museum world, and art world. I'm actually gonna like move around my questions a little bit because you mentioned a piece of history that I feel really fortunate about. That I was reading Black and Blues by Monty at the same time that I was reading this book. And in that book, she mentions Cape Verdean and Portuguese immigrants going to the East Coast. And I was like, you mentioned that like in this book, and I was like, okay, voyeurism. Same thing was happening in All We Were Promised. I'm like, wow, there's so many little tidbits of knowledge that you just kind of like deep into the story so well. So my question is, how do you go about researching your book, especially like a journalist or editor, a lawyer, I'm sure that informs your research.
Yeah. Well, it usually starts with the museums. That's usually where I'm kind of getting the story from, and I might go look at the exhibits again, see what other information is there around a particular time period. Libraries have been a big part of it, especially libraries like in the place that I am researching. So when I was researching All We Were Promised, I was working at the University of Pennsylvania, so I had access to the library, which was super unique. And then when I was doing Runner, I was at the Martha's Vineyard Museum, and they let me have access to their art archive, so I was able to find old photos from the island of Life. I was able to find old records. I was reading the meeting minutes of like a temperance group that was like an anti-alcohol group at the time, and that's kind of how some of those pieces made it into the story. So I pull a lot from those places, and also just like online research. You can find out quite a lot. And for the Vineyard in particular, there are a couple of residents who are basically just like full-time Vineyard historians who write the most specific possible books ever. Like there was a point at which I was writing Runner, and one of the key parts of the storyline is that they're going to lose their house because of taxes on it. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, like I wonder how many Black families own their homes. And then I started Googling, and this one guy, his name's Thomas Dresser, Black ownership in Martha's Vineyard in the 1920s. And like, you wrote a whole book? Like, what do you mean, what? And then another book came out while I was working on it that's like, Martha's Vineyard in the 1920s during prohibition. Like, this is very convenient. So you can find people who, maybe they're not big name historians, but they have kind of a niche in this space that you're looking at. And there's a lot of really rich, very detailed work.
Yeah. One, love the library. Support our library. Yes, we can have more research available to us. But two, that was awesome to see. Like this Black family owning their own home in the 1920s. Obviously, it comes with like the potential for destruction and like racism and all that. But it was just nice to see that in history book. Let me pivot a little.
Sure, yeah, please. How do you organize your research, given, like, I haven't read the book yet, but just kind of hearing Karina talk about, like, what's in the book and how it is weaving together so many disparate scenes and disparate parts of history. What does that look like for you to kind of organize these streams of thought so that you're able to pull from them and kind of know where you're going as you write the book and as the book, writes itself?
Yeah. I wish I had a better answer. I organize it very poorly. I have a bookshelf, and I just keep the books that I'm using on that shelf. They're not in any particular order. They're not organized in any particular way. It's literally just, what am I looking for? What can I pull it from? And I do often have moments of panic, like towards the end of writing the book, where I'm like, where did I find this fact? Did I make it up? I can't figure out where this came from. Or I have to go back and look through it. And the other piece is I have just Word documents, very poorly organized Word documents that are just full of facts that I pick up when I'm reading these books, and I just type them in. They might be building descriptions, they might be legal facts or something like that, and I just have to kind of control that from documents for the information that I'm looking for. So it's a very poorly organized system, and leads to a lot of chaos. fact checking process, which is always the thing I go through towards the end. But I don't know, it's working so far, so I guess it works.
I guess on that same page, just curious, like from idea to what we have in our hands right now, how long was that time?
For this one, it was about 2 years. That's a lie. It was about 4 years. That was fast. It was about 4 years. But only because I had this idea right at the same time my publisher bought my first book. So it's like I had the idea, I mentioned it to them, and then I set it aside. But from the time when I was actually like hardcore researching and writing it, it was about 2 years from then to now.
I still think that's fast.
No, I'm like,
wow. That's very impressive. I think especially for like your second novel, when I talk to other authors, they're like 7, 8 novels into the process where they get to that like 2-year range. So that tells me a lot about like your previous history. I'm very different over 2 years, but any other questions? I'm gonna get into like character work. But at the heart of this book we have Lena Jameson, which threw me off because my name is Lena James, and I was like, I'm the middle child, she's the middle child, she has young twin siblings, I have young twin siblings. I was like, okay girl. I get it, like what's going on? And even just more stuff that I relate to her about. But she's dealing with a lot. She is trying to hold her family together, both emotionally and financially. Learning about her father, uncovering stuff about her father. How did you come to Lena, and what did you want her to like reckon with, especially with the backdrop of like 1920s?
Lena, she kind of came to me fully formed once I learned about that shipwreck. Even though this was like 12 years ago, before I knew I was ever actually going to write a book, I went and wrote the first page of this. It didn't actually end up being the first page, but it was an argument between Lena and her brother about their father disappearing in this shipwreck and whether or not she was going to take over her business, and the brother being like, that's insane, you can't do that. And that page just sat in a drawer for 12 years, and like now it's this. But Lena has always been kind of the center of the story, and what I ended up wanting her to reckon with was the idea of home to some extent. She is doing all this in part to save her family's house, but also so she can leave. She has lived on this island for her life. For her, this is like small town America. It's stifling, it's terrible, and she wants to see more of the world. She doesn't romanticize the island in the same way as somebody who is a visitor there. And so I wanted her to really understand, like, what is the world that you're trying to get out into and find yourself in, and is it worth leaving this place for? And some of what she experiences when she gets out into the world is terrifying, is dangerous, and she ultimately kind of needs to come to a place, sort of make peace with where she's come from and how she's going to relate to it in the rest of her life. So that's kind of the journey I wanted her to be on, at least with relation to the place. But the other big journey for her is she's a young woman, her father has died, she's learning all of these things about this man she idolized who was a criminal. There was a lot of other stuff too that I will not tell you about. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but this is not a good man. And she is learning this, and he's dead. And she's trying to reckon with all of this, and she's angry and she's furious, and she cannot tell him any of the things that she's angry and furious about because he's gone. So she spends a great deal of time blaming everybody else for a number of the choices that he has made, and what it means to kind of reckon with and understand who your parents are, not as your mother, not as your father, but as people who are flawed and who are in relationship with one another and relationship with other people in ways that may be flawed as well.
I'm kind of like having a moment because also like this is why I feel like time does not feel real to me, because the way that you laid her character out 1920s feels the same as someone that would be struggling with something in 2020. And it's kind of related to another question I had, but I want to stay on this path, which is like sometimes I felt like Lena was criticized for wanting more, but really she's not wanting more. She's just trying to like make sure that this survival mode does not last for her lifetime.
Yes.
And I think that I feel like when you look at the choices Lena makes to survive, do you see that Black women are forced to make today.
Yes. So what she ultimately has to do is step into a leadership role in her family, partially because she's always played one, she's the eldest daughter, but also partially because the men in her family have failed. Her father got himself killed, in a shipwreck, or maybe it was an accident. It was not an accident, but maybe it was an accident, theoretically. Her brother is sort of functionally useless in this time, even though he was the one who was doing all this for her father. So there's a gap that she's left to stand in, and I think that's kind of a familiar space for many Black women in this time, and also in all the times between the 1920s and right now. And also that sense of criticism for stepping into the gap and trying to take this leadership role of her family, even though she's the one who, for all of her flaws, is the most organized, the most sort of qualified, the most responsible. I guess the most relatively stable compared to the other deeply unstable people in her family.
Everyone's
Yeah. There was really nobody else, and I think, across families, across politics, there's always that sense of there's nobody else, so a Black woman has to step up and do this, and people are going to rip her apart for it, and that's kind of what happens to her story.
Yeah, I think earlier, pre this chat, Ashton asked me who my favorite character was, and I was like, I kind of love Lena because I just feel like this connection with her, obviously outside of the name, especially that of criticism from wanting more, but also the survival mode, but also you're capable and also you're forced to be. So, yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And speaking of the other characters, which was the hardest for you to write? Which was the one that came most natural? And did any of them surprise you?
I think the hardest for me to write was Lena's brother, Walter, who is a World War I veteran and also struggles with alcohol abuse, but he is also a drug runner, so he's constantly surrounded by alcohol. Alcohol is his job, but he doesn't have a functional relationship with it. But he's also deeply irresponsible, very charming and funny. So finding the line with him of empathy for him as a character and not making him the butt of jokes because he's funny, but what's happening to him in many ways is sort of not. That was a really tricky balance for me to write. What was the other?
I think I asked if there was any character that surprised you.
Yes, but I can't say.
Oh, okay.
I can't say
There
who
was
it
a
is
couple characters
because
that
I wanted
surprised
to
me.
surprise all of you.
Okay, no, I do appreciate that. Yeah, I won't say too much as a follow-up because I don't want to ruin the story for anyone, but I'll pivot a little bit. So both of your novels contain a bit of family secrets, and that feels very true to Black life, real life. I feel like so many of our ancestors survived just unspeakable things and their trauma response was silence. As a historical fiction writer, how do you